We've got a great panel. There's no pressure for General Gabram, but there's two other former AMCOM commanders here that will be judging his answers. And so we'll have 1 to 10 on the slides. But we have obviously our AMCOM commander, Major General Doug Gabram here. We've also got Mr. John Hall. He is the deputy, the CASCOM CG. Command Sergeant Major Jason Huff, who is the Senior Aviation Non-Commissioned Officer for Observer Coach Trainer for the National Training Center. So he's the one that we really want to talk to about is maintenance working. He knows the deal. We also have Major General Jim Myles. He is with the Myles Associates. There's a TV show actually that goes on, and then we have Mr. Mike Sousa, who's the manager for advanced programs for GE Aviation. So we're going to jump right in with questions, and so this first one I'm gonna tee up for General Gabram. The current sustainment system has been described as a just-in-time system that has been optimized for relatively steady-state environments such as the ongoing counterinsurgency fight. How is our current supply system postured to support more expeditionary or large-scale combat operation environments?
Yes. No.
Dang.
So, first off, I'd just like to thank General Ham, General Swan, Command Sergeant Major, and everybody for the opportunity here. I think the other panels have been absolutely fantastic. So we will try, at least I'm going to try to operationalize and simplify a couple things. So I want to answer this question, but I want to make a few points as I do that. And I got asked a question today running around here, and that is, of course, this is a self-tee up also. What keeps you up at night? So besides progression of old age and seeing if the Browns are going to win one game this year, there are a few things of concern. And number one, and I'll forgive my transparency and candid thoughts here, but I just don't know any other way to do it. So number one is fleet readiness. Fleet readiness, and specifically our Apache issues and fixing that. And I can get into a little bit more about that. And number two is, are we ready for a near-peer fight? And I'll come off the tactical side and talk the sustainment side of that. So number one, in terms of fleet readiness, what does that really mean? To me, it means when a young specialist in the Korengal keys the mic and he needs medevac or he needs whatever he needs, fires, our aviators and all three platforms are there. That's number one. So that sacred trust and relationship is the most important thing we do, period. And that's a hard measurement. I used to measure it when ground commanders or soldiers used to use certain call signs, and there's many out in the audience. Many of my bosses and mentors are here today. But when you hear your call sign and it goes something like, that Destiny 6 or Attack 6 or whoever you want it to be saved my life. That's what it's all about. But, so here I sit in this chair, and it's about operational readiness and numbers, because senior leaders like to see numbers. That equates to FMC rates, et cetera. So this morning when I got up, or when I looked at the buzz on my BlackBerry at 6:15, which we get every morning, our readiness rates this morning were Apaches for Compo 2 FMC was 71%. That's not bad considering some of the issues we have going on. Black Hawk was about 74 and Chinook was about 77. Those plus or minus 4 to 5%. But that is not bad, and our Black Hawks and Chinooks, just FYSA, have made the DA standard 75% for about the past 3 or 4 months, which is pretty damn good. Apache, primarily due to the strap pack issue, is coming from about 65, 68. We're at 70 right now, but we're coming. The strap pack issue is, we've been fighting this for about a year, but through teaming with Boeing, through PEO, AED, ACCR, the whole aviation enterprise, we have a material solution, and we're fielding it. We are fielding the mega nut, and we're about 19% complete. 19% complete. So every day there's an AMCOM, PEO, and Boeing team on the ground. We're doing 2 battalions a month, and this is not easy. We're doing major surgery on every one of our main rotor heads, putting this back on. Why? To reduce the burden on the soldier, because we don't want to borescope this thing for the rest of our life every day. And 2, to restore confidence, right? Confidence and trust, I heard that word today. Trust with this aircraft between aviator and ground. So this is a good news story. We got a ways to go. Third quarter 19 is when we'll be completely done with the Mega Nut retrofit. In the meantime, we have a thing called, and I don't want to get too technical, but a fail-safe collar that we're putting on aircraft to mitigate risk. So we're fighting that as an enterprise, and it's really important. So are we ready to fight near-peer threat? So Afghanistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Nobody's got a crystal ball, but we've been doing that for over 15 years. What if, on top of that, what if we were faced with a near-peer, which we all know who those folks are. We talked about it throughout the day today. Our demand, I think you all would agree, our demand would increase by approximately, what do you think, 50%. 50% on parts. So right part, right location, right time, multi-domain, will be multi-broke. We won't even get to the domain piece because we got to have parts no matter which way you slice it. So how do we deal with that? What do we do? So our focus, just in time. So back to the original question, Jim. Just in time. We've been at just in time for the past 15 years. Nobody's fault. That's just the way we do it. I pledge to you that might not work if one of those near peers get thrown on our plate. So our drive, our focus is what are the key readiness drivers for Black Hawk, Apache, and Chinook? We know what they are. I know what they are. I'm not going to go over it here, but if I were to throw 20 note cards in the middle of the floor right now and I write 20 things down, I bet you we'd be at an 80% when we come up with the final answer. Engines, I'm familiar, blades, transmissions, rotor blades, gearboxes, those are some of the readiness drivers. So okay, General, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? What that means is we're turning the ship on those 10 readiness drivers time now. So when I say ship, many of you in the audience are specifically Boeing, Sikorsky, and GE are with me on monthly meetings, and we talk about each one of these readiness drivers, where we are at contractually. 3 questions. The first question is, what's our stock on hand? What's our stock on hand? I'm not going to go over those numbers, but one might, if you talk about a certain component, you might find it interesting on what we have. Stock on hand. Number 2, what's our average monthly demand? We know that. We don't have to be a rocket scientist and 10,000 equations. We know what that is. How many back orders do we have? So what our metric is, it's very simple. We want 90 days stock on the shelf based on average monthly demand, no back orders greater than 30 days. That's our metric. And that's what we're going to fight for, and that costs resources, that costs prioritization. It's a holistic fight. I understand we got to do it all behind the curtain because it's not just the 10 readiness drivers, and that's the red team on this concept. But we're not going to lose the next war because we didn't have enough of those, and we know what those are. So we got to prioritize, and that's what we're shooting for. So when we talk about strategic depth in the supply chain, it's good and bad, but it's concerning in a lot of cases. So we're going after the readiness drivers, and I heard Amazon being thrown around earlier. We need to be maybe more like Amazon in some ways, but we're not Amazon. We fight and win our nation's wars, and we need certain things on the shelf, not excess, but the right parts at the right time on the right shelf is where we're driving towards. And we've laid this out to the AMC commander. We've laid it out, frankly, to many of you in the room, And I appreciate your teamwork on it, and that's where we're driving towards. So just in time is effective in our LMP, Logistics Modernization Program. That's another class. But LMP gives you solutions to kind of give you a just in time to create efficiency and effectiveness. But we need some strategic depth based on this near peer threat and just based on many other things that we know. Because what keeps me up at night is stock on hand in some key readiness drivers. So that answers that question, I hope, and I know I'm going to probably get "Sir, you said," and that's okay. So I'll stop there.
Hey, Jim, let me pile on for a minute. I've watched AMCOM obviously for a long time, and watching what Doug and the team has done to take a look at LMP and seeing the signals of becoming efficient at the expense of effectiveness, and seeing how they've been able to work their way through the short-term demand that LMP gives you, and recognizing that that's not what's going to get us prepared for the next fight. It's about getting past the bow wave. It's about getting ahead of the contingency stocks, and it's about making sure that that you've got the long-term sustainability. I mean, you know the number of engines that are required for the flying hour program you have. Same thing with transmissions and everything else. And sometimes you'll get the short-term signal, and watching the way they've done it has been really phenomenal. That, and on top of this expeditionary sustainment starts in the units at the time you're told you're going to deploy. What's the readiness of your aircraft? What's your PLO look like? What's the ASL look like? How trained are your crew chiefs? How trained are your maintainers? Because that's the start of it. And then on top of it, at the strategic level, we're talking about what AMCOM and DLA is supposed to be doing, and the transportation guys, to make sure that we're doing the right thing at the strategic and operational level. It's a partnership across the board, and if we're not doing the right things at the tactical level, and I love what's happening here, Bill, you guys and FORCECOM units as well are. Phase maintenance is now part of the vernacular again. Green suiters, we're focusing on getting the green suiters right. Training in a expeditionary world, in a multi-domain world here out at the National Training Center, we need to do that. We need to understand what that impact is on the readiness. How does it affect the readiness of our organization? So I like what they're doing. Some of you don't know what has been done there at Redstone in terms of getting your special kits, outfits, special tools packaged, ready to go to deploy in multiple places simultaneously. Doug, it's good to see, and that's the kind of thinking we need to make sure that sustainment-wise we're leaning as far forward as we possibly can. Holes in the yard, pre-911, remember all that? A lot of us have heard those terms before. We don't want the holes in the yard prior to a big fight.
So just one point, I'm sorry, it's really important. All these readiness drivers are each part. So let's take, I'll be careful here. Let's take a rotor blade, Apache main rotor blade, for example. How do we get main rotor blades? There's 3 ways to do it. You buy new, commercial, you commercial repair, or you organic repair. 3 ways. That's life. So we're taking holistically and strategically, we're looking at that, and we're equating it back to that average monthly demand. So how many do we need? And then contractually, whether it's PBL, performance-based logistics contract, or it's organic, whatever way, we're connecting the dots on all of this now. So you buy new, you repair new, or you fix organically, which is CCAD, that place Corpus Christi in Texas. And then how much do each of them cost? And it's like your mutual funds. Are you diversified? You don't want to be a one-option person here, right? So why do we need strategic depth? Political landscape. Look at the news, tariffs, these things going around, I don't know. War, really important. Hurricanes, tsunamis, you're laughing. Typhoons, we lost over 30 blades in our Korea Reserve because of a typhoon. This hail damage, we just got hit in Colorado, over $2 million damage. We almost lost CCAD. Harvey almost took care of that. The fire suppression system went off in multiple hangars over the past 2 weeks. 8 Apaches covered with foam and all kinds of crap. We didn't know what was in the foam. That's good for helicopters. So all these things, this is why we need strategic depth in those 3 avenues. That's how we're going after it. And then it's a science problem. So I'll shut up.
No, thanks. That's good discussion. I'm going to bring it up a little on multi-domain operations. So we have John Hall here from CASCOM who's looking at it across the board and in the sustainment piece. And how do you pull all that together to put together a sustainment for the entire force?
Okay. Thanks, Jim. And thanks again to AUSA for inviting us all here. So I'm going to answer it in the context of the question that General Gabram raised. Are we ready for a near-peer fight? And as we look at that from both a large-scale combat operation perspective, which is really, current, what we're looking at currently, we see, there's lots of gaps, but 2 big gaps that we have in the sustainment warfighting function. One is the synchronization gap. And part of that relates to a point that General Gaylor brought up this morning. Division and corps commanders have to be able to set conditions, right? And so we've optimized our sustainment force structure headquarters for COIN, and we optimize them for efficiency, not for effectiveness. And so if you read 3.0, it uses words like assigning sustainment brigades to divisions and attaching sustainment brigades to divisions and ESCs to corps. And we're reflecting the same language as we write 4.0, which will be the sustainment companion piece to 3.0. There's some force structure challenges with that, availability of force structure that we've got to work through, but we're moving back toward giving division and corps commanders the sustainment formations they need to be able to, wait the sustainment battle and set conditions in the sustainment warfighting function. The other gap is capability gaps, right? Fuel distribution is a huge gap that we have right now. We just don't have the right amount and the right type that we need. So we're working through that, but those are 2 big gaps right now. So if you turn it to multi-domain operations, from a sustainment warfighting perspective, 2 big challenges. One is the idea of 7 days of semi-independent operations. So we looked at a armored brigade combat team doing 7 days of semi-independent operations in a war game, and assuming little or no resupply from higher echelon, 441 sustainment trucks. 441 sustainment trucks to sustain an armored brigade combat team for 7 days of 22 miles of convoys. So one, I don't know if we have that many trucks in the Army for one single brigade combat team. And secondly, just the battlefield geometry and the dispersion, the other part of that's really challenging for us for multi-domain operations is dispersed operations and how do we support that. So from those 2 things as a background, we're seeing multiple things that we need to do, the Army needs to do. One is fundamental demand reduction. Fundamental demand reduction. We believe the Army really has to achieve 50% energy reduction in order to execute multi-domain operations. And in my mind, this is not a sustainment problem. This is an operational problem. One, we don't have that much capacity, and 2, I don't know how we maneuver that much stuff around the battlefield in multi-domain operations. The second one is, you heard some of this morning, you heard this term this morning, continuous integration of vice episodic synchronization. So episodic synchronization is what we've always done from a sustainment perspective. So we have board centers and cells, right? They meet every day and they decide what we're going to move in the next 24, 48, 72 hours. We did the same thing. Jim and I were together in OIF-1, did the same thing there. We figured out what we were
Still waiting on my trucks.
And what we were not going to move for Jim, in Jim's case. But that's episodic synchronization, right? That's meeting every day and figuring out what you're going to do. Okay, how much flexibility does that give you? How much flexibility does that give an operational commander? Not a heck of a lot. And in the pace of operations that we see under multi-domain operations, we believe from a sustainment perspective, we have to achieve continuous integration. And we can do that through multiple means. And so you start with sensors on platforms, right? You start with sensors on platforms. And then you have to move that data, that information off those platforms. And then you have to have trained personnel who can see that information and know what to do with it, right? People who are trained to analyze, big data and all of that. How are we training our people to be able to absorb that amount of information and then make decisions or make recommendations to commanders for decisions on what to move and how to move it and when to move it? And so that all implies, things like CBM Plus. It implies much greater, taking much greater advantage of our ERP systems than we have up to now. So we've got LMP for, AMC for the tactical version of that, is GCSS Army. Quite frankly, we've just begun to learn how to use that. And we've not yet learned how to really use it to enable commander decisions so that we can keep pace with multi-domain operations. And then the last part then is with the dispersed forces. We believe that greater use of unaccompanied air or unmanned air is going to be necessary assigned to sustainment forces. Multiple versions with different lift capabilities, different distance capabilities, and so on. All of that, we believe we have to bring together in order to support multi-domain operations.
Let me just leverage off of that a little bit with industry and Mike at the end there. So you talked about big data, you talked about sensors. Got a question on advanced manufacturing. What's industry doing with all that?
Thank you. So again, we certainly are spending a lot of resources at this point, and we are predominantly a commercial engine company, and we do a whole bunch of sustainment of commercial engines, and trying to leverage that to the Army is what we really want to spend as much time as we can on. So there are investments that we're making in things like additive manufacturing for how we would manufacture parts in the future that can be more efficient and can also add a whole bunch of different ways that we can sustain parts that are out in the field. When you talk about repairing, is there an opportunity to use additive manufacturing for repairing parts? We also, on the big data front, and one of the things we talk about, with all the concerns about cyber, is more and more we are investing in using data that comes off of those engines in the field to make sure that we keep those engines on wing longer so that we don't have as much turnover, as much demand on the sustainment side of the equation, whether we're talking about things like usage-based lifing, which is actually keeping track of how much life we've used on the actual parts, or whether we're trending how the performance of the engine is performing in the field so that we're not prematurely taking engines off wing, so that we can be proactive if there is maintenance that's required, identifying when it's time to do things like water washes so that the engine can stay on wing a significant amount of time longer. We certainly want to be doing those kind of things.
And so, Jim, you consult with many, many companies on those type of things. What have you seen?
Yeah, I do. And what I'm seeing is John talks about big data, understanding big data. I'm seeing a lot of the businesses saying I can do big data, and it can help my system, and I can help drive down. I could drive up TBOs, extend the TBOs out if I just could use the data and harness the data. And I see both of those going on, and at the same time we're talking about in a multi-domain fight, the potential and likelihood of commanders being faced with overflying a TBO and conduct the mission or not fly it. It's all about risk management, trying to understand it. Yes, we're authorized under combat operations. Yes, you're authorized, commanders are authorized to overfly a particular inspection. But what do you know about it? And you don't. Making an informed decision so you don't pass on that risk down to the soldier is what we're all about. And I do believe HUMS-based systems, information, harnessing the information and working with our engineers, the science and technology community, they'll help us understand. We know what the profile of the aircraft are. We know what the TBOs are based on the worst possible flying conditions of 6 or 7 environmental flying conditions. That's how you come up with TBO. Science and the engineering community, that's how they figure it out, and they do do a sigma event here that even takes it out even further for risk. Well, what happens if you've been flying your Black Hawk for the last 100 and 150 hours straight and level doing a log run where you're not stressing the transmission in the engine? Now you got to pull the TV and you're coming up on a TBO and you got to conduct a mission. Wouldn't it be nice to know what that condition is and to have something given a commander, some information and some tools that says if you've been flying in this flight regime for this period of time, you can extend it if it's doing conducting combat operations. Bottom line is it's easier to transport a digit than it is a main transmission or an engine. And so take advantage of what we have because the technology is there. Granted, there's lots of issues and lots of requirements for the money, for money to make this happen with our legacy systems. Number one, make sure that future vertical lift has got that embedded in it. I do like the requirements we've got set up. I think I saw FARA was somewhere between 30 to 60 days being able to fly continuous operations, hundreds of hours before you'll need some sort of a maintenance inspection. Love that. That's a good way to go. Don't have that with our current system. So it's about having the same architecture, making a play, and use that big data because I think it's there. So connect the dots.
General Myles, great comments. We lead right into the thing I knew was going to come up sooner or later is CBM. But before we get to that, just on the additive manufacturing, the question, what is the future of additive manufacturing, 3D printing in the aviation force? I can tell you that General Perna, one of his primary priorities is additive manufacturing and 3D printing. So we have several of our depots taking a look at this. I would say in terms of the aviation portion or piece of this, we got to be careful that because the airworthiness aspect of 3D printing and additive manufacturing is significant. A tank goes bump in the night, nothing happens. Aircraft, we know if we're messing around with flight controls, we could have a different outcome. Not to say that there's potential here, but we just got to maybe take an appetite suppressant when it comes to certain aspects of the aircraft. And then to General Myles' point, I mean, he essentially touched on the conditions-based maintenance plus. So DAG4 is going to cut a XORD soon. AMC is going to be the primary executive for CBM plus for the Army, primarily on the ground side. But obviously, as many of you know, we've been doing this a couple years. The issue, and I've spoken on this before, we got a good start because we have a document, a strategy signed by General Gaylor, myself, and General Todd. And that took us quite some time because it's about the DOTLM PF aspect. We didn't fail before, but we were not synchronized because the branch wasn't leading us. Now they are, and now we are. We got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of pockets of excellence on CBM and Army Aviation. Pat Mason talked earlier about scale. The task force, the 160th, does this really well, but it's Ace Hardware and Walmart. I mean, it's about scale. We're trying to take as many TTPs as we can from the 160th. So we're in positive motion, momentum on CBM. More to follow. A lot of companies are coming at us because I know you want our data, and you got to have the data to obviously do something with. We're a little bit cautious on that aspect because we have the capability to do it. We just have to do it faster. So more to follow on that.
If I could just make a comment on advanced manufacturing, specifically the tactical application of advanced manufacturing. We've got some work to do in the Army and figure out what is it we want. I mean, it can't do everything, right? We can't imagine even 50 years from now can it do everything. So how do we get it focused? What are the outcomes we're seeking out of advanced manufacturing? Are we trying to Are we going to focus it on readiness drivers? Are we going to focus it on, and I'm speaking more from the ground fleet perspective here, but I just think inside the Army, if we don't get it focused in a particular toward a particular outcome we're seeking, then we're going to spend a lot of years thinking about it and not really achieving anything.
So this is about getting the AMRDEC community involved with industry for additive manufacturing, because there's some that they're leaning forward on, and that you can tell that industry knows they know where the issues are, because they want to build in reliability as well. And I do think it's been working fairly well with AMRDEC in terms of of additive manufacturing. So what I encourage industry to do is if you've got something you think will play well in additive manufacturing, reach out to Emmerdeck. I do believe they've got the right people there that know what right looks like, and they can tell you one way or the other whether they agree to it. I was actually surprised when I looked into this how much they actually leaned forward and wanted to know more and were willing to approve additive manufacturing if it's in the right area. You got to crawl, walk, run here, but I mean, I think you've got a lot better technology or a subject matter expertise than I even thought we had when I looked into it.
If I could just add one more thing on the additive manufacturing, one of the things we really find is that it's probably easier if you're doing a full qualification of a new product to get the Army comfortable that we've got the additive manufacturing technology that we can use in that new product. Because we're going to go through a full qualification of an engine anyway, we can incorporate it and we're going to do all that testing. If you want to go back and retrofit an existing part and use additive manufacturing rather than the manufacturing process we've used in the past, it's harder because then you have to figure out what exactly to do to qualify that part and how difficult that will be. And it clearly is not just go print a part that looks the same and is geometrically the same, because the material properties are necessarily going to be different. There is a lot of work that has to go into how do we retrofit existing parts within additive manufacturing technology. Yeah, and the benefits that we see in additive manufacturing are first and foremost when you're trying to make something that you just couldn't have made before. You can thin out walls and get material thicknesses that are much more controlled than what you could do using other manufacturing processes. It's a lot easier in certain cases to use that technology to make parts that you couldn't make otherwise. And so if you're going to make a part that you have other ways of making anyway, what's the advantage of doing it there? And so unless you're opening up that design space, the benefits are much more reduced. Now, if you've got a really old legacy part that you can't make any other way, and you can make that part look like it's a new part, then you have to think about the risk of incorporating that into a configuration. And it is a lot easier to do it on a truck or a tank than it is to do it on an aircraft.
Weight reduction is a big advantage to that. I've seen pieces of a combustion combustor element, and I mean the weight reduction is significant. I didn't realize the number of welding pieces that they had to put together to provide the right reinforcement structure that is no longer required.
So that's a great topic, and that's going to continue as a something to think about in engineering. Usually you design the part based on what you think it's supposed to look like in a design drawing. What if you work on it from the opposite perspective? Tell them all what it needs to be able to do and let the computer design it for you. We found that has reduced significantly the design of a system and reduced the weight as well as the time it takes to make it. Interesting. Now let me take it down a level to where the rubber meets the road. So we've got Command Sergeant Major Huff here, Senior Aviation OC, NTC, who has been through 9 rotations. The real deal is, how are we doing on the sustainment piece? And are we making improvements from where we were, where it was all contractor support for the most part in OIF and OEF, to now I know we're pushing to get the soldiers back out there to do the phases and everything else. Sergeant Major?
Thank you, sir. It's a great question. So we see struggles with aviation at the National Training Center. And we see struggles for a couple reasons. Primarily, aviation units have not had to handle expeditionary sustainment for over 18 years. We've continuously operated in theaters where we've had large SSAs that have been set up to support rotational forces. So when we disconnect a multifunction aviation task force away from an ASB, away from a cab headquarters, mix MDSs, and then deploy it to Atropia West, what we find is we struggle with what is our right ASL, what is the right PLL, do the companies bring the bench stock? And then we struggle with things like special tools. Do we have those special tools inside of the aviation task force? Did we get them from our sister battalion and squadron? really falls into two camps. Either we see a very light element that comes forward that relies heavily on reach back to the ASB to use commercial delivery to try and get parts to us. That works sometimes, though you have a long lead time to get parts in. We eat a lot of NMC time because we can't get that aircraft up for multiple days. And then as you're moving around the battlefield at 72 to 96 hours, moving your TAA, you end up leaving a trail of aircraft behind that requires security. And obviously that's a high value asset that you just don't want to leave on the airfield or in the TAA. The other piece of it is we don't understand what we need, so we bring entirely too much with us that requires additional help from the CSSB because, once again, we don't have that ASB slice. We don't train the ASB at the National Training Center. It's not part of the force that comes with it. So you have to rely on external assets to move your task force around, which, of course, reduces your ability to operate and survive in that environment. And the other thing we see is the sustainment network in and of itself. So just like any of our mission command systems, it's susceptible to either disruption or total denial based upon a near-peer threat. So what we don't see at the tactical level is how do we have a flexible and redundant sustainment system that is able to continue to allow us to get what we need to maintain our aircraft and build that combat power to support the ground force commander. I think we're getting better at maintenance as the aviation maintenance training program is coming online. We'll get that out there, putting green suiters back into maintenance, not relying so much on contract maintenance. I'm looking forward to the aviation maintenance handbook to come out because one of the things we see is we look at not composite risk management, but CBM plus is the ability to understand that we need to pull and replace this component. But our soldiers understand pulling and replacing a component, not everything that goes behind it. So where we see a lot of struggles is in the P4T3 process and ensuring that we have all the parts and pieces and tools and people that when we're going to pull those parts off, we can put an aircraft back together and get it back into the fight. Overall, we're making strides. But once again, it's one multifunction aviation task force disconnected from its support battalion. So we create an artificiality there that the support battalion and the CAB headquarters don't get that rigorous training in that live environment to help stress all the systems across the brigade.
You know, it seems like if we're at the National Training Center and we talk about live, virtual, constructive, we ought to find a way to be able to pulse this whole expeditionary sustainment. It's about limiting comms, parts, and reach back. And of course, at National Training Center, sometimes you don't have to do too much to limit your comms, parts, and reach back. But I mean, if we say the environment is set up to where we're going to be in a limited, austere environment, and then we're going to maintain some sort of air superiority, comm superiority, cyber superiority, then that means we need to understand how to pulse and get the systems in, and understand how to modulate that thing based on what the conditions of the battlefield is. And I can't think of a better place than the National Training Center to do that, but it will require live, virtual, constructive is wrap around here to actually put the maximum stress on the units. But I sure wouldn't want to see it be a virtual environment. It needs to be live for you guys to understand it. And quite frankly, P4T3 and the training, understanding how to do maintenance, not over maintaining the airplane, knowing what's broke, gosh, does that limit the impact on the supply system when you're doing the right thing to troubleshoot?
So just a couple comments on that. If we were going 14 to 18 days in the NTC and it's just the first time you're doing split ops, you're not gonna pass. So we got to do, back to Mr. Rowland's, some of his points equate to training. Maintenance is training, training is maintenance, and there's an art and science of maintenance management. It's a forgotten art in some cases. No blame there. It's just the way it is. A lot of folks throw the contractor argument around. I think that's mildly interesting. We did make a decision downrange to pull our maintainers. It was a troop that it was just, I think everybody in this room would have made the same decision based on the parameters they had. However, the good news is our ASBs are back in the fight as I think the past 4 rotations in Afghanistan for sure. So that piece of it, although we atrophied, we took some hits for maybe a couple years because we didn't have our kids over there, but we're back in that. But I would just, we can talk about it all day long in this group. This isn't the group we need to be talking to about this. The P4T3 aspect, the training, how to conduct a production control meeting. This is the other part of my job, which I enjoy truly. We've established a maintenance aviation readiness meeting at the FORSCOM level. Lieutenant General Richardson, the DCG of FORSCOM, now hosts that, and she drags everybody through the basic questions. When we go down, in some cases, down to bumper number or tail numbers. So this is going to be a constant fight. I think our doctrine's right. We just got to lead through it.
Well, appreciate it. Appreciate the comments. The key, again, is when the rubber meets the road is how we doing on our actual live training and how can we better improve it. And having the Sergeant Major down there is what we need to do to make sure that gets fed back up into the schoolhouse and then back to the troops. That's the key. I mean, I always call it lessons relearned. We always learn these lessons, especially at NTC and JROTC, and they're so important to this whole fight.
So we do something called AMCOM 101, where we bring, FORSCOM has mandated that all new battalion and brigade commanders go through the course. We do a 2-day in Huntsville, and we talk about some of the topics we've talked about, but we also emphasize what can we do for the field, and then we go through our capabilities. For example, SSAs. How many battalion and brigade commanders really understand their SSA, how it works? You got to go there first. That's step one. So we talk about, we lead through things like that. So it's good training.
Now let me take this off to a different aspect of sustainment, on the expeditionary sustainment in the air domain. So John, this is for you. The large scale combat operations will require increased dependency on aviation capabilities for the force projection, the distribution, and medevac. Therefore, what acquisition conditions are being set to ensure future platforms can be dedicated to sustainment missions?
Wow, that first part of it, I'm not sure I can answer. What acquisition conditions? But it was back to the point I made earlier, though. I truly believe that the agility, the flexibility that commanders need to support dispersed operations will require that there's some level of capability in sustainment formations to have unmanned aerial vehicles. And I know there's some airspace things associated with all of that, and I know there's a lot of work we got to do to figure out how that would work. But I'm not sure how we would be able to support dispersed formations without some capability like that. I don't know if General Gabram's got any comments on that.
Well, I'd go back to the tactical a little bit on this. Split ops, many of you in the room have dealt with split ops before, and the challenge, quite frankly, we have is not only on the sustainment. I'm going to come out of my lane here a little bit, but it's the right leadership, and we're split. If you take a look at Afghanistan right now, General Sousa, when you were there, I mean, we were split more, but we have aircraft all over the place. We have 2s and 3s and all kinds of things going on, and you got to have the right leadership. And the P4T3 of split ops, you have the wrong part, you fly the wrong part out, and it's not properly thought, you just ate another 3 days of downtime. I mean, then you can't put combat power in the air. So not to digress from the strategic level to the tactical level on this, but my biggest concern is the fact that we got teams out there all over the country, and we're asking these kids to do a lot of things in terms of risk assessments and all kinds of different missions. But the good news is, as we talked about, we got great aviators doing the best they can. So. Yeah,
and I mentioned dispersed, but I did mention the distances that were, if you're looking at multi-domain operations. I think that leads to the need for some level of unmanned aerial vehicle capability within sustainment formation.
So, Command Sergeant Major, I'm going to throw a doozy at you. How would you recommend the sustainment systems or operations or organization, based on your view over the last 9 rotations, how would you recommend they should change in order to adapt to this new environment that we're potentially going back into?
Good question, sir. When it comes to our sustainment systems, you know, we talk pace, and we get back really to analog and digital. Analog, and then how do we get analog to digital? The sustainment systems that we have, when you look at, say, a unit that brings a VSAT that has a very small signature, I think that's a great way to start out with it. The overall sustainment system, and it's not just as we sit through a rotation, we see all different formations. It's not just aviation that struggles with this. It's, you know, the sustainment in general. But the ability to establish procedures that you're able to execute without comms in an austere environment, and then be able to push that higher and collect it, and then act on it and be able to get your sustainment needs back out. It's really going back to analog products and solid procedures up front, so that when your upper TI or your communications is taken away from you, it doesn't degrade your force like we see it does now.
If I could just one comment on, you mentioned VSAT. So we're going to have increasing demands on VSAT, and what is the next generation of that we're going to have? So not only do we have our tactical supply system, but we got IPSA coming online, right? And we're going to personnel accountability and casualty reporting and things like that will be done through IPSA, which will have to be done, if we did it today, it would be done through VSAT. And so we've got to develop a capability greater, better, faster, et cetera, than what we currently have.
Yeah, so right now we're transitioning off AUSA to aircraft notebook. And aircraft notebook there's many advantages, don't want to get into it here. It's got to be used properly. It's tied to VSATs, but that is going to be the linkage to G Army. Not to get technical, but in G Army, ground systems we're executing, so we're next. And that equals audit readiness and a whole other realm of audits, et cetera. But ACN, G Army, that'll happen towards the end of 19, and then there's 2 other waves with the BIBW, which will be our database for airworthiness. So how do we, right now, when we have a situation weekly, when we got to go run a blade down or run a part down, how do we have all that information? Nobody else has that. So we know exactly where, by tail, by serial number, where certain, if we need to go find 10 engines, for example, that may have a non-conformance issue. We can do that right now. So as we transition to G Army, we got to be very careful on what we do with that data, and we're in the midst of that right now.
Mike, I got one for you on industry. So you've heard how they can how basically from the ground up from NTC and that what should change. What's industry's perspective? How does the Army need to change to support what you're trying to do with the next generation of equipment?
So I think one of the things that we all have to be aware of as we talk about sustainment and we look at the next generations is that, like with the comments that were made before about how future competitions are going to be run and the importance of sustainment and getting that factored into the selection of how you're going to pick systems, how you're going to pick components for the future, and that's built right in on day one into the requirements so that we all know long before the competition occurs how important that is to you. Is it more important to have systems that are maintainable in the future so that when things wear out, you've got ways to repair them? Or would you rather have a system that never gets maintained? And do you want us to compromise on performance of systems so that we can have almost zero maintenance kind of approaches in the future. When we look at the commercial world, nobody would be willing to compromise performance to the point that you didn't have the need to do sustainment. And it's hard for me to imagine we are going to ever get to a point where you don't have to sustain those systems. So the importance of understanding how those things are going to be graded in the procurements in the future so that we're working on the right technologies, we've got the right features in there, and that we understand that long before the competitions occur is something that we need to understand that trade space and be working on today.
Thanks. Jim?
Yeah, I think, you know, I see this thing from both sides. I think what I'm seeing is industry wants consistency. They want to have predictability. Boy, wouldn't it be nice if I had long lead time contract that would allow me to go for 10 years instead of 5 years, so I can then go to my subs and have predictability and allow them to go buy their long lead time parts. Army says that'd be great, but guess what? I've just gone from combat ops and counterterrorism to now I'm going back to full-scale spectrum operations, and my demand has changed, and it needs to be, it's a different mindset, and I think we need to meet somewhere in the middle. I think contractually, we all have lived the legend of people saying it's okay to have something put on contract, and it'll take 600, 700 days to get something on contract and get it out to the field. Contracting needs to be reduced so that from the time somebody says they want something to the time we actually get something out there before the priority changes in terms of dollars or requirements is a big deal. And I think there's this use of OTAs is a real good way to allow industry and the Army to come together in a much quicker fashion. And there's some perturbations of it. People get upset if they're not involved in it. But guess what? If you're not involved in it, trying to support what the Army wants, then industry's not doing what they need to be doing. You need to be leaning in and understanding what the customer wants. Quite frankly, what I've seen in OTAs industry that's been successful on OTAs are those that know what the Army wants, and you're willing to help them understand it and shape it and give them what they need. Those are the ones that seem to be more successful than those that have stayed back on OTAs. So what that means is the more you understand what the Army wants, better off industry is going to be, because quite frankly, industry needs to respond to the Army. The Army at the same time, and I love what the Army leadership is doing, they're having dinners with industry. They're trying to hear what they have to say, and they're trying to close that gap. I don't think you're going to have a better Army facing industry than you got right now, in terms of trying to change and shape things a little bit differently and trying to hear what you have to say. So I think you've got an Army that's leaning forward as much as it possibly can. The idea now is try to understand what they're asking for and meet them halfway as best that you can. Army still needs to be consistent with what they're saying, and when you change and modulate things, that's great. Because if you went to industry now and said we're going to have a zero maintenance aircraft, or we're going to have one that's going to make maintenance down to where you're going to have 95% OR rates instead of 80%, industry will get after it. But when you go back and change it to 75, because we're just kidding, industry will no longer be really responsive to the Army because you change your mind. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you change your mind. So the idea is when you do change your mind and priorities change, communicate it. That's what I would tell us, and the Army needs to do, is make sure you over-communicate what's changed and why. So, just a thought.
So, I just, on the sustainment side, and you know, when you look at the life cycle cost of anything, what's the predominant cost? It's in 70% of this weapon systems in sustainment, kind of a fact, or the weapon system. So, to build, you know, somebody mentioned it's just a KPP and it always gets traded off. And we've seen that happen. But again, I would say as we look to the future, as we look at FEL and whatever that turns out to be, CBM, sustainment, zero near maintenance, all those things needs to be baked into it from the beginning. And you need to tell us what that is. You need to give us options on that. It's not that we don't want it. Of course we want it. So I would just say give it to us so we can't take it anymore. I just, what I hear a lot is when we get into these discussions on certain parts or systems, we're a lead time away. We're a lead time away. And then when I really start to peel that back, the forensics on that, we sometimes 18 months for a part. I can name about 10 off the top of my head. I won't, because and then when we really tear that apart and do the forensics of, and there's a lot of parents out there, and the subs are the kids, right? We don't understand what the pacing items or what the limb facts. Is it material? Is it capacity? Is it shifts? Is it people? Is it process? And I would just ask you, and we're just as much at fault. We got to do, I think, a better job as a community of making sure our subs are where we want them to be, and they're in line. If that makes sense, and you can counter fire on that if you want. I'm sure you can. So quality, my last, speed, accuracy, quality is kind of our mantra at AMCOM. Speed in terms of we got to procure faster and repair faster. Accuracy in terms of forecasting, because if we can't forecast properly, how can we give you the requirement, right? And then quality. We can't lose that, because we're in a position we are in now on many aspects because of quality. And when we're inside of a gearbox or an engine or a transmission or pick one, and we got a non-conformance, and we have the same, if you saw the paper, we had the same issue at CCAD just recently, it just sets us back. So quality is really important.
John, you have a question from the audience?
So the question I have is, you mentioned the difficulty we have with fuel distribution. Are all of the 92 Fox soldiers being taught the complexities and strict requirements of aviation fuel? And what is being done to ensure the standards of handling aviation fuel? So we have the 92 Fox training at Fort Lee, and the short answer is not enough. This is one of the courses that we shortened back in the mid 2000s or so to get, and we've never linked it again. So we've got I acknowledge this is a challenge. We had a challenge similar to this with some other MOSs, and we were able to work with Forces Command to put some courses in their troop schools. And so I'm going to take this back to Fort Lee. Because if we can't fix it inside TRADOC means making the course better or longer, right? And so that costs the Army money through the training peg, or we can work with Forces Command. That's another potential solution. But I appreciate this comment, and I will take it back to Fort Lee to figure out how we can help solve this problem for the Army. But I would be interested in Sergeant Major's comments and seeing if you're seeing the same. What are you seeing from 92 Fox Aviation refuelers at NTC?
So my team is pretty lucky. I have two extremely talented 92 Fox Sergeant First classes. But what we have traditionally seen is in 10 rotations now, we've only had 2 rotations that have had Sergeant First classes as the 3-5 platoon sergeant. So a shortage of senior non-commissioned officers in the 92 Fox realm, and it just leads down to training and everything else. The problems that we do see with the fuel is primarily in our jump FARPs and our ability to extend our distances. Not being familiar with the equipment, or units not utilizing all their jump FARP capability to push out and then extend or provide redundant fuel. As we all know, once the fuel goes away, then we just become sitting ducks on the ground. So there are some challenges out there. It's not, I don't think it's so much in the realm of what we see of proficiency of individuals. It's just lack of senior leadership, and then lack of, I don't want to say desire, but experience in using our jump FARPs to extend our capabilities.
Okay, thanks. Doug, you want to talk a little bit about the six-pack?
Yeah, we're coming up on time, and I just wanted to, and I know Bill's going to close, but I just wanted to first thank all the folks in industry that are out here. We work closely with many of you. Disagreement doesn't mean disrespect. We're all rowing towards the same objective, and that's to take care of our soldiers. The transparency that we have, the dialogue in a lot of our issues right now is very good, and we need to keep it that way. We've tackled some tough issues, specifically with the Boeing team, and we're moving out, we're moving on, and we're going to fix it. And that's the only way we know how to do it. But the power of the six-pack led by General Gaylor and his leadership has really put us in this position. So I'm old, and I'm just going to say that I've seen a lot of teams, and if there's an issue out there, please bring it to the six-pack's attention. General Todd's not here; he's overseas. General Pepin just came on board, and Brigadier General Francis had to leave, I'm sure, because he got grabbed in the Pentagon. And then, of course, John Shipley's behind the scenes. Say a prayer for him. He's working through some health issues. But the power of the force is strong, and if there's an issue, please bring it to us, no matter what it is, and we'll get after it as a collaborative team. So, thanks.
Yeah, I guess my final get off the stage is that everyone's been talking about sustainment and making sure you build it in from the beginning. Every course an acquisition officer gets is about how you design in all of that sustainment, and you will be better off for it. Unfortunately, as funds become tighter and we start trading that away, it becomes a challenge, and we're all paying for that right now on all of our systems, and so it's unfortunate. But hopefully, as we go forward and we get more aggressive on one, our timelines, but two, and reinforcing or enforcing the design criteria for sustainment, I think we'll all find that we'll be able to look back in our rocking chairs and say, yeah, we've got a great force, and there is such a thing as the Dr. Lewis zero maintenance out there. So appreciate everyone staying around, and I appreciate AUSA for hosting us. Thank you very much.